I never imagined that my own daughter would leave me in a rundown motel with a smile on her face, then return home to put my house on the market before my bed had even grown cold. When I finally stood across from Jennifer in a crowded courtroom, she looked at me as if I were nothing more than an obstacle standing between her and a payday. She believed the deed proved the house was hers to sell. But the moment my attorney placed one forgotten document on the judge's bench, Jennifer's confidence disappeared, and the entire courtroom fell silent. Before I tell you how everything unraveled, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. If this story touches your heart, please like this video and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. And tell me honestly in the comments, if your own child betrayed your trust like this, could you ever forgive them? For 41 years, the house on Maple Ridge Lane had been my whole world. It was not a mansion. It was not the kind of place people stopped to photograph. It was a 2-story white house in Columbus, Ohio, with blue shutters, a wide front porch, and an old maple tree that leaned over the driveway like it was protecting us. But to me, every board, every window, every nail in that place carried a memory. My late husband, Richard Moore, used to say, "Melissa, this house knows us better than anyone else ever will." And he was right. That kitchen had seen our first Thanksgiving dinner when the turkey came out dry, and we laughed until we cried. The living room still had a faint mark on the hardwood floor from the rocking chair where I nursed our daughter Jennifer. The hallway upstairs still held tiny pencil marks where Richard measured Jennifer's height every birthday until she was 14 and decided she was too grown for such things. After Richard passed away 3 years earlier, people told me the house would feel too big. They were right. Some nights, the silence felt so heavy I could hear the refrigerator hum from across the room. I would sit at the kitchen table with 1 cup of tea and 2 placemats still out because putting his away felt too final. I missed the sound of Richard clearing his throat while reading the newspaper. I missed the way he tapped the railing twice before climbing the stairs. I missed his hand reaching for mine when the evening news got too sad. But I stayed. Not because I was stubborn, though. Jennifer liked to call me that. I stayed because that house was the life Richard and I had built together. We bought it when we had almost nothing. We painted the walls ourselves. We planted the roses ourselves. We fixed leaks, replaced floors, raised a child, buried dreams, built new ones, and grew old there. So when Jennifer started visiting more often, I wanted to believe it was because she missed me. At first, her attention felt sweet. She would stop by with groceries, though. Half the time she brought things I didn't eat. Almond milk, gluten-free crackers, little salads in plastic boxes. She would look around the kitchen and sigh. "Mom, this place is a lot for one person." I would smile and say, "So am I." She never laughed. Jennifer was 42, polished in a way I had never been. Her hair was always smooth, her nails always done, her clothes always pressed. She lived across town with her husband Brian Carter in a newer subdivision where all the houses looked like they had been ordered from the same catalog. Brian worked in real estate investments, though I never fully understood what that meant. Richard once said very quietly, "That man spends money like he's trying to outrun something." At the time, I thought Richard was being unfair. Now I know he was being observant. Brian began coming with Jennifer on Sundays. He would stand in my living room with his hands in his pockets, looking around like a buyer at an open house. "Original hardwood?" he asked once, tapping his shoe against the floor. "Yes," I said. Richard refinished it himself. Brian nodded slowly. "Homes like this are getting good numbers lately." Jennifer shot him a look, but not the kind that meant stop. It was the kind that meant not yet. I noticed. A woman my age notices more than people think. We may move slower, but we hear tone. We see glances. We remember what people said 3 weeks ago and compare it to what they say today. Jennifer began asking questions that did not feel like concern. "Mom, where do you keep the insurance papers? Do you still have Dad's old files? Is the mortgage completely paid off? Did Dad ever update the deed after he got sick?" That last question made me pause. I was folding dish towels at the kitchen counter. Jennifer sat across from me, scrolling through her phone as if the question had meant nothing. "The deed?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just paperwork stuff. Brian says it's good to have everything organized. Your father handled most of that." "I know, Mom. But Dad's gone." The words were true, but the way she said them made something inside me tighten. Brian leaned against the refrigerator and added, "It's just practical, Melissa. Houses can become a headache if paperwork isn't clear." I looked at him then. Really looked at him. His smile was polite, but his eyes were not warm. "My paperwork is clear enough," I said. Jennifer gave a small laugh. "Nobody's accusing you of anything. We're just trying to help." Help. That word became her favorite key. She used it to unlock conversations I did not want to have. She wanted to help me clean out the basement. She wanted to help me sort Richard's old desk. She wanted to help me set up online banking, even though I had managed my bills just fine for decades. She wanted to help me think realistically about the future. One afternoon, she brought pamphlets for senior living communities. I stared at them on my kitchen table like they were snakes. "Jennifer," I said softly, "why would you bring these?" She sat down across from me and reached for my hand. "Because I love you." I wanted so badly to believe that. "You're alone here," she continued. "What if you fall? What if something happens at night? What if you forget to turn off the stove?" I have never forgotten to turn off the stove. Not yet. Those 2 words hurt more than she knew. Not yet. As if my mind was already leaving me. As if my independence was only a temporary inconvenience to her. I pulled my hand away. "I am not ready to leave my home." Jennifer's face changed then. Only for a second. The softness disappeared, and underneath it I saw irritation, impatience, maybe even resentment. Then she smiled again. "Of course, Mom. Nobody's forcing you." But after that day, things shifted. She stopped asking and started observing. She opened closets without asking. She checked medicine bottles. She looked through mail stacked beside my phone. Once I found her in Richard's study, standing at his old filing cabinet. "What are you doing?" I asked. She jumped, then laughed too loudly. "Looking for the warranty for your water heater. Brian said it might be old. The water heater is fine. Mom, you don't have to get defensive about everything." I stood there, one hand on the doorway, feeling like a stranger in my own home. That evening after Jennifer and Brian left, I went into Richard's study and opened the filing cabinet myself. Nothing looked obviously missing, but one drawer was slightly crooked, as if someone had pushed it shut in a hurry. I sat in Richard's leather chair for a long time. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. His reading glasses sat in the drawer where I had left them. On the wall was a photo of us from our 30th anniversary. I touched the frame and whispered, "Richard, am I imagining this?" Of course, the room gave no answer. A week later, Helen Brooks came over with a lemon pound cake. Helen had lived next door for nearly 30 years. She was 71, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and honest in the way only a true friend can be. She and Richard used to argue about baseball every summer over the fence. She sat with me on the porch while the sun went down behind the maple tree. "Jennifer's been here a lot," she said. I looked at her. "You noticed, honey? I notice everything on this street." I tried to smile. Helen lowered her voice. "There was a man here last Thursday when you were at your doctor's appointment." My smile faded. "What man? Came in a dark SUV?" Jennifer let him inside. Brian was with them. My stomach tightened. "Maybe a contractor." Helen shook her head. "Contractors don't wear suits and carry leather folders." I sat very still. "Did they see you watching?" I asked. Helen gave me a look. "Melissa, I was watering my hydrangeas. I wasn't hiding." I turned toward the house. Through the front window, I could see the lamp glowing in the living room, the one Richard bought me at an estate sale because I said the shade looked cheerful. For the first time in all those years, the house looked vulnerable, like something someone might take. That night, I barely slept. Every creak sounded like a warning. Every shadow felt like a secret. I told myself Jennifer was my daughter, my only child, the little girl who once ran through that same hallway with missing front teeth and peanut butter on her cheeks. Surely she would never plot behind my back. But love can make a mother excuse the first lie, and the second, and sometimes even the third. The next morning, Jennifer called earlier than usual. Her voice was bright, almost too bright. "Mom, Brian and I are coming by later. There's something we need to talk about." I stood in the kitchen holding the phone, watching rain slide down the window over the sink. "What kind of something?" I asked. There was a pause. Then Jennifer said, "Just something that will make life easier for everyone." Those words should have chilled me. Because when people say everyone, they often mean themselves. Jennifer arrived that afternoon with Brian standing half a step behind her, the way he always did when he wanted to appear respectful while still controlling the room. I remember the rain had stopped, but the sky stayed gray. The maple leaves outside my kitchen window trembled under the weight of water, and everything smelled damp and metallic, the way old houses sometimes do after a storm. I had just finished wiping the counter when I heard Jennifer's key in the front door. She still had a key because she was my daughter. That was the simple reason, the reason I would later regret. "Mom," she called out, her voice sweet and careful. "In the kitchen." Jennifer walked in, carrying a folder pressed against her chest. Brian followed with a paper coffee cup in one hand and his phone in the other. He gave me a quick smile, the kind people use when they are already thinking about something else. Jennifer kissed my cheek. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," I said. "You made it sound urgent on the phone." She glanced at Brian. That glance told me the conversation had already been rehearsed. Brian stepped forward. "Melissa, we don't want you to panic. There are few sentences more likely to make an older woman panic than that one." I set the dish towel down slowly. What happened? Jennifer pulled out a chair and sat across from me. There may be a problem with the plumbing. Maybe. Brian nodded. I noticed some moisture near the basement wall last time we were here. You noticed moisture in my basement and didn't mention it. We didn't want to worry you until we knew more, Jennifer said quickly. Brian had someone look at it. I stared at her. Someone was in my house looking at my basement? Jennifer's smile stiffened. Mom, please don't make this into something ugly. We were trying to help. There was that word again. Help. Brian placed his coffee on the counter. Older homes can have serious hidden damage. If there's mold, you can't stay here. Not safely. Mold, I repeated. Jennifer reached for my hand, but this time I moved mine into my lap before she could touch me. It might be nothing, she said, but it might not be. The safest thing is for you to stay somewhere else for a few days while we have everything checked properly. A few days where Brian answered before she did. A motel nearby. Clean, quiet, easy access. We already found one. The room seemed to tilt a little. A motel, I said. Jennifer, I have neighbors. I have friends. I could stay with Helen if something was truly wrong. Jennifer's expression changed at Helen's name. Mom, Helen is 71. She doesn't need the stress of hosting someone. She's my friend. And I'm your daughter. That sentence landed between us like a thrown plate. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Jennifer softened her voice. I know this is sudden, but I am trying to keep you safe. If you breathe mold at your age, it could be dangerous. My age, I said quietly. She looked tired then, or perhaps impatient. You know what I mean. I looked from Jennifer to Brian. His eyes slid away from mine and settled on the cabinet behind me. He was not nervous. That frightened me more than if he had been. A nervous liar makes mistakes. A calm one has already made plans. What company inspected the basement, I asked. Brian cleared his throat. A contractor I know. What is his name, Doug? Doug what? Jennifer sighed. Mom. No, I said. If a man came into my home and inspected damage serious enough to push me into a motel, I would like to know his full name. Brian's jaw tightened. I can text it to you later. I should have pushed harder. I should have called Helen. I should have walked downstairs myself and looked at every inch of that basement wall. But Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Not many. Just enough. I can't do this if you fight me on every little thing, she whispered. Dad trusted me to look after you. That was the blade she knew exactly how to use. Richard. My husband's name in her mouth still had power over me. It pulled my anger down into sorrow. It made me feel guilty for questioning my own child. I looked at Jennifer and saw not the polished woman with the folder, but the little girl who cried into my lap after Richard missed her school play because he was working overtime. I softened. How long, I asked. Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my fingers. Just 3 or 4 nights, maybe less. Brian nodded. We'll handle everything. Everything! Another word I should have feared. Jennifer went upstairs with me to pack. She moved around my bedroom as if she already owned the air inside it. You don't need much, she said, opening my closet. Just comfortable clothes. I watched her pull down my small blue suitcase from the top shelf. Richard had bought it for our last anniversary trip to Asheville. We had planned more trips after that. We never got them. I can pack for myself, I said. I know, Mom. But she kept helping. She folded 2 nightgowns, 3 blouses, a pair of slacks, undergarments, my robe, my slippers. She put my medication bottles into a plastic bag without asking. When I reached for my jewelry box, she stopped. You won't need that at a motel. My wedding ring is in there. You're wearing your ring. Richard's ring is in there. Her face flickered. It'll be safer here. I stared at the small wooden box on my dresser. Richard's ring had sat inside since the funeral, wrapped in a white handkerchief. Some widows wear their husband's ring on a chain. I could never bring myself to. I liked knowing it was in our room near our bed, still part of the house. I want to bring it, I said. Jennifer hesitated, then placed the box in the suitcase. That tiny victory fooled me. It made me think I still had control. Downstairs, Brian stood near Richard's study. The door was half open. What were you doing in there? I asked. He turned around quickly, looking for a flashlight, in case the power flickers again. There's one in the kitchen drawer. Found it, he said, holding up nothing. Jennifer appeared behind me with my coat. Mom, we should go before traffic gets bad. As I walked through my house, I moved slower than usual. Not because my knees hurt, though they did sometimes. I moved slowly because some part of me knew I was being taken away from something sacred. I looked at the family photographs on the hallway wall. Jennifer in her graduation gown, Richard holding a fishing pole and laughing at some joke I had forgotten. Me at 50, standing in the garden with dirt on my cheek and roses in both hands. At the front door, I turned back. The living room lamp was still on. Should I turn that off? I asked. Jennifer touched my shoulder. Leave it. We'll be back later. We, Brian and I. To meet the contractor. Right. The contractor named Doug, whose last name no one could remember. The motel was only 15 minutes away, but it felt like another country. It sat beside a gas station and a fast food restaurant with a cracked parking lot and a sign that buzzed even in daylight. The room smelled of old carpet bleach and cigarettes that had been painted over rather than removed. There was a bed with a faded green comforter, a small table, a television bolted to the dresser, and curtains that didn't close all the way. Jennifer tried to make her voice cheerful. It's not fancy, but it's just temporary. I placed my suitcase near the bed. I thought you said clean and quiet. Brian gave a short laugh. For the price, it's decent. The price, as if I had asked to be discounted. Jennifer shot him a warning look. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged under me. Suddenly, I felt older than I had that morning. Jennifer took my phone from my hand. Let me put our numbers on speed dial. They're already in my phone. I'll just check. She tapped at the screen for a moment, then handed it back. Call me if you need anything, she said. When can I come home in a few days? You'll call me tonight. Of course. She kissed my forehead, and for 1 second I wanted to hold on to her. I wanted to say, Jennifer, something feels wrong. Please tell me I'm still your mother and not a problem you're trying to solve. But pride kept me quiet. They left together. I watched through the narrow gap in the curtains as Brian opened the passenger door for Jennifer. Before getting in, she turned and looked up at the motel room window. She didn't wave. That was the first moment I felt truly afraid. Not suspicious, not uneasy, afraid. That night, Jennifer did not call. I called her at 8. No answer. I called again at 9:30. Straight to voicemail. At 10, I called Brian. He did not answer either. I sat at the motel table with my robe wrapped around me, listening to footsteps pass outside the door. Every car that pulled into the lot made the curtains glow with headlights. Every muffled laugh from the hallway reminded me that I was not home. I finally called Helen. She answered on the second ring. Melissa, are you all right? The sound of her voice nearly broke me. I'm at a motel, I said. There was a pause. What? Jennifer says there's mold. Or plumbing. Something in the basement. Helen was silent long enough for my heart to start pounding. Then she said, Honey, there were no contractors at your house today. I gripped the phone. What, I was outside most of the afternoon. No trucks, no workmen, just Jennifer and Brian. The room seemed to shrink around me. Helen lowered her voice. And Melissa? Yes. They carried boxes out of Richard's study. I could not speak. My eyes moved to my suitcase on the floor, to the small wooden jewelry box sitting on top of my folded clothes, to the motel door with its thin chain lock. Jennifer had not moved me for safety. She had moved me out of the way. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with my phone in my hand, listening to the buzz of the old heater under the window and the occasional slam of car doors outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Helen's words in my mind like they had been written across the wall. They carried boxes out of Richard's study. Richard's study was not just a room. It was the one place in the house I had hardly touched after his death. His law books, tax files, old letters, insurance papers, appliance manuals, and folders were still arranged in the careful order he preferred. Richard had been the kind of man who labeled everything. Even the batteries in the junk drawer were separated by size. Jennifer knew that. Brian knew that. And now they had gone through it while I was sitting in a motel room that smelled like bleach and old smoke. By morning, fear had turned into something sharper. I called Jennifer at 7. No answer. At 7:30, I called again. No answer. At 8, I left a message. Jennifer, this is your mother. Call me right away. I want to know what is happening at my house. I waited 20 minutes, staring at the black phone screen like I could force it to ring. Nothing. Finally, I called Helen. I need to go home, I said. I'll come get you. No, I said. If Jennifer sees your car, she'll know you told me. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then call a cab. I already did. That was a lie. I had not called one yet. But I needed to sound braver than I felt. The taxi arrived 40 minutes later. The driver was a young man who barely looked at me as he put my suitcase in the trunk. I sat in the back seat with Richard's ring box in my lap, gripping it with both hands. As we drove through Columbus streets washed clean by the rain, I tried to prepare myself. Maybe there would be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Jennifer had panicked about papers. Maybe Brian had misunderstood something. Maybe the boxes were just old files they planned to organize. A mother can build a whole house out of maybes when the truth is too painful to hold. But when the taxi turned onto Maple Ridge Lane, my heart sank. There were 2 cars in my driveway. One was Brian's dark SUV. The other was a silver sedan I did not recognize. And beside my front porch, stuck into the wet grass, was a small metal sign frame. The sign itself was turned sideways from where I sat, but I could see enough of the red lettering to understand. For sale. My breath left me so suddenly, the driver glanced in the mirror. Ma'am. This the place I could not answer. The house I had lived in for 41 years looked the same and completely different at once. The blue shutters, the porch swing, the maple tree, everything was still there. But that sign in the yard made it feel like someone had placed a price tag on my memories. Yes, I whispered. This is the place. I paid the driver with shaking hands. He set my suitcase on the curb and drove away, leaving me standing alone in front of my own home like a visitor who had arrived without permission. I walked up the driveway slowly. The porch steps were damp. The front door was closed. I reached into my purse and pulled out my key, the brass one Richard had given me when we first moved in. It was old, worn, smooth at the edges, but it had always worked. Until that morning. The key slid halfway in and stopped. I tried again. It would not turn. My hand began to tremble. I pulled the key out, checked it like somehow it had changed, then pushed it in again. Nothing. The lock was new. For a few seconds, I simply stood there staring at the door. I had entered that house carrying groceries, birthday cakes, flowers from Richard laundry baskets, church casseroles, Christmas gifts, and once a crying newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket. I had never once imagined there would come a day when my own key would not open it. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. Finally, I heard footsteps. The door opened just a crack stopped by the chain lock. Brian looked out. His face did not show surprise. That told me everything. Melissa, he said. What are you doing here? The question nearly made me laugh. What am I doing here? I repeated. This is my house. He glanced over his shoulder. Jennifer isn't here right now. Open the door. This isn't a good time. Open the door, Brian. His jaw tightened. You're supposed to be resting. I am not a child. I am not a guest. And I am not supposed to be anywhere except inside my own home. Before he could answer, a woman's voice came from behind him. Is that the owner? A woman in a beige blazer stepped into view behind Brian holding a tablet against her chest. Her smile was professional and uneasy. Brian quickly said, This is Melissa, Jennifer's mother. The woman's expression changed just slightly. I looked straight at her. Who are you? She hesitated. I'm Denise Palmer. I'm with Palmer and Reed Realty. The porch seemed to tilt under my feet. Why are you inside my house? Brian opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. I am asking her. Denise looked from me to Brian, then back to me. I was told the property was being prepared for sale by the family representative. Family representative, I said. Did you speak to me? No, ma'am. Did I sign anything? Her eyes shifted again. I was told paperwork was being handled. By whom Brian pushed the door wider, but the chain still held it. Melissa, you need to calm down. That phrase did something to me. Maybe because Jennifer had used it so many times. Maybe because men like Brian always seemed to think a woman's anger was a medical condition. I stepped closer to the door. You changed my locks. For security, he said. You put a for sale sign in my yard. It's just a preliminary listing. You brought a realtor into my house while I was locked out of it. His face hardened. Jennifer is trying to make responsible decisions. Responsible for whom? He did not answer. Then I heard a car pull up behind me. I turned and saw Jennifer's white SUV stop at the curb. She got out quickly, her face tight with panic she could not quite hide. Mom, she called. What are you doing here? There it was again, as if I had wandered into someone else's life by mistake. I stood on the porch with my suitcase beside me and said I came home. Jennifer hurried up the walkway. You shouldn't have left the motel without telling me. You didn't answer your phone. I was busy. Selling my house. Her eyes flashed toward Denise, then Brian. This is not the place to discuss this. It seems exactly like the place. Denise cleared her throat. Maybe I should come back another time. No, I said. I want you to hear this. My name is Melissa Moore. I own this house. I did not agree to sell it. I did not authorize a listing. I did not authorize anyone to change the locks. Jennifer's lips pressed into a thin line. Mom, please stop embarrassing yourself. The words hit me harder than any shout could have. Embarrassing myself. Not hurting, not confused, not betrayed. Embarrassing. I want the key, I said. Jennifer stepped closer and lowered her voice. You are not thinking clearly. A coldness moved through me. What did you say? She looked toward Denise again, then softened her tone in that practiced way she used around strangers. Mom, you've been under a lot of stress since Dad died. You forget things, you get upset. Brian and I are just trying to manage this before it becomes worse. I forget things I said. You forgot about the plumbing issue. There is no plumbing issue. Jennifer looked at Brian and he immediately said, There is moisture damage. Show me the inspection report. Silence. Denise shifted uncomfortably. I turned to her. You see, there is no report. Jennifer's face flushed. Mom, stop. No. I have stopped too many times already. For the first time, people began appearing at windows. Mrs. Alvarez from across the street pulled back her curtain. A man walking his dog slowed down near the sidewalk. And from the side of my yard, Helen Brooks emerged with a pair of pruning shears in one hand, though there was nothing near her that needed pruning. Jennifer saw her and understood instantly. Her face changed. So that's how you got here? Helen did not blink. No, Jennifer. Your mother got here because it's her home. Brian unhooked the chain and opened the door fully at last, but he blocked the entrance with his body. I think everyone needs to take a breath, he said. I looked past him. Boxes sat in the hallway. Richard's study door was wide open. A framed photograph of Richard and me, which had always hung above the small bookshelf, was leaning face down against the wall. That was when my voice broke. You took his picture down. Jennifer sighed as if I were being difficult over a decoration. We were staging the house. Staging. They were erasing us to make the house easier for strangers to imagine as theirs. I stepped forward, but Brian did not move. Let me inside, Jennifer said. Not today. The words were quiet, final, humiliating. Helen came up beside me. Melissa, come with me. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to push past Brian, run into Richard's study, gather every photograph and paper and memory into my arms. But I saw the look in Jennifer's eyes. She wanted a scene. She wanted me crying, shouting, shaking. She wanted witnesses to see me as unstable. So I did the hardest thing I had done in years. I stood still. I lifted my chin and looked at my daughter. You can lock a door, Jennifer, I said. But you cannot change what is true. For one brief second, something like fear crossed her face. Then it vanished. Helen took my suitcase in one hand and my elbow in the other. As we walked down the porch steps, I saw Denise Palmer pull Jennifer aside and whisper something urgent. Brian was already on his phone. By the time I reached Helen's yard, my knees were trembling. Helen guided me into her kitchen and sat me down at the table. She poured coffee I could not drink. Then she placed her hand over mine. Melissa, she said softly, there's something else. I looked up. Helen's eyes were full of worry. I saw the listing online this morning. My throat tightened. How much? She swallowed. $389,000. I closed my eyes. That was not just a listing, that was a plan. And my daughter had already put a price on the home where I had raised her. Helen's kitchen smelled like coffee lemon polish and the pound cake she had baked the day before. It should have been comforting. It should have felt safe. But I sat at her small round table with both hands wrapped around a mug I had not touched, feeling as though the floor beneath my life had split open. $389,000. That number kept echoing inside my head. Not because of the money itself, though it was more than Richard and I had ever dreamed our house would be worth when we bought it. It echoed because Jennifer had looked at the place where I had cooked her childhood breakfasts, the porch where Richard taught her to ride a bicycle, the bedroom where I stayed awake through her fevers, and all she saw was a number. Helen sat across from me, her face tight with anger she was trying to control. I printed the listing, she said. She slid several pages across the table. I stared at the first page. There was my home photographed from the curb on a sunny day. Whoever took the picture had done it recently. The maple tree was trimmed. The porch swing had been removed. The listing description read, charming two-story family home in a desirable established neighborhood. Ready for new memories. Ready for new memories. I put my hand over my mouth. Helen reached for me. Melissa, they took down the porch swing, I whispered. I know. Richard built that swing. I know, honey. The listing showed photos of the living room, the kitchen, the dining room, and even my bedroom. My bedroom. My quilt had been replaced with a plain white comforter I had never seen before. The family photographs were gone from the dresser. Richard's side of the bed had been stripped of the books and reading lamp that had stayed there since he died. It looked clean, empty. Like I had already disappeared. I pushed the papers away and stood too fast. The chair scraped against Helen's floor. I need to call Jennifer again. Helen did not stop me. This time Jennifer answered. Mom, she said, sounding tired before I had even spoken. This has been a very stressful morning. For whom I asked. She paused. I don't want to argue. You changed my locks, listed my house, moved my things, and had strangers photographing my bedroom. You do not get to decide whether I argue. Her voice lowered. Please be careful how you speak to me. The shock of that almost made me laugh. Careful? Yes. Because people are concerned. What people? Another pause. Then she said, family. Something cold moved down my spine. What have you told them, Jennifer? I told them the truth. No, you told them something. I want to know what. She exhaled as if she were speaking to a difficult child. I told Aunt Carol that you've been struggling. I told Mark and Denise that you've become forgetful and emotional. I told them you agreed months ago that the house was too much for you, but now you're getting confused and changing your mind. For a moment, I could not breathe. Aunt Carol was Richard's sister in Indiana. Mark and Denise were my cousins in Dayton, people I had known for decades, people who had come to our home for birthdays, funerals, and 4th of July cookouts. You told them I agreed to sell my house. You did agree in principle. I never agreed. You don't remember agreeing. There it was. The trap. Every denial became proof. Every protest became confusion. Every tear became instability. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Jennifer, listen to me. I am telling you clearly. Take down that listing. Give me a key to my house. Put my things back where they belong. I can't do that. You can. No, Mom. I can't keep enabling this fantasy that you can live there alone forever. Fantasy, I said. My life is not a fantasy. You left the motel without telling anyone. You caused a scene in front of a realtor. You accused Brian of things he didn't do. He stood in my doorway and refused to let me inside. He was protecting you from yourself. My knees weakened. I sat back down. Helen watched me closely, her eyes filled with alarm. Jennifer continued softer now, more dangerous because of it. Mom, I know you don't like hearing this, but we may have to look at legal options, just temporarily, to help manage your affairs until you're stable. Legal options. The words landed like handcuffs. What does that mean? I asked. It means I'm trying to keep everything from falling apart. No, Jennifer. You're trying to sell my house. I am trying to prevent you from losing everything because you refuse to face reality. My reality is that my daughter abandoned me in a motel. Her voice hardened. I did not abandon you. I put you somewhere safe while necessary work was being done. There was no contractor. You wouldn't understand the process. I understand betrayal. Silence. For 1 second, I thought I had reached her. I thought maybe the word would break through the wall she had built around herself. Then she said, I'll call you when you're calmer. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. Helen's face had gone pale. Legal options. She's going to say I'm not competent. Helen pressed her lips together. Can she do that? She can say anything. People believe adult children when they say they're worried about their aging parents. They think concern and control sound the same. Helen stood and began pacing. We need to call somebody. Who? A lawyer. I almost said I did not have one. Then I thought of Richard's old attorney, Thomas Bennett. But the thought felt distant, buried under years of grief and paperwork. I had not spoken to him since the estate matters after Richard's funeral. Before I could answer, my phone rang. Aunt Carol. My stomach twisted. I answered because not answering would look like hiding. Melissa Carroll's voice was cautious. Not warm. Cautious. Hello, Carol. Jennifer called me. I assumed she had. She's worried sick. I closed my eyes. Is she... She said you wandered out of a motel this morning and showed up at the house confused. I hired a taxi and went home. But why were you at a motel? Because Jennifer put me there. She said there was a mold problem. There is no mold problem. Carol sighed. Sweetheart, do you know that for sure? I opened my eyes and looked at Helen. Helen shook her head slowly as if warning me not to let my anger take over. Yes, I said carefully. I know that for sure. Jennifer says you've been forgetting conversations. Jennifer is lying. The word felt ugly but freeing. Carol was quiet. Then she said, that is a very serious accusation. So is telling people I'm losing my mind so she can sell my house. Carol made a small sound, half shock, half disapproval. Melissa, I know this is emotional, but maybe you should consider whether Jennifer is trying to do what's best. That hurt. Not because Carol mattered more than my daughter, but because Jennifer's lie had already traveled faster than my truth. What's best for whom? I asked softly. Carol did not answer. After we hung up, the calls kept coming. My cousin Mark left a voicemail saying, maybe it's time to listen to your daughter. Denise texted, we love you, but please don't make this harder on Jennifer. A woman from church whom I had not spoken to in months wrote, Jennifer asked us to pray for your confusion. We are here for you. Confusion. They had already given my pain a name that made Jennifer innocent. By evening, I felt like I had been pushed into a glass box. I could see everyone, hear everyone, but no one could hear me clearly. Every person Jennifer contacted became one more wall between me and my own life. Helen made soup. I did not eat it. She set a blanket around my shoulders. I barely felt it. At some point, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Jennifer. My head lifted. Helen answered on speaker. Jennifer's voice came through, tight and polished. Helen, I know my mother is with you. She is. I appreciate you helping her today, but I need to ask that you stop encouraging this. Helen's eyes narrowed. Encouraging what? her paranoia. The word struck me like a slap. Helen looked at me, then said coldly, "Melissa is not paranoid. You don't see what we see as family. I have lived next door to your mother for 30 years. I see plenty." Jennifer's voice sharpened. "Then you should know she isn't safe alone in that house. She was safe until you locked her out of it." There was a silence. Then Jennifer said, "Be careful, Helen. Getting involved in family legal matters can become complicated." Helen's face went still. It was not just a warning. It was a threat. After Jennifer hung up, Helen sat down slowly. "She's scared," Helen said. "No," I whispered. "She's desperate." Helen looked toward her hallway, then back at me. "What is it?" I asked. She stood without answering and walked to a small cabinet near the dining room. From the back of the top shelf behind old photo albums and Christmas candles, she pulled out a large manila envelope. My name was written across the front in Richard's handwriting. Melissa. My breath caught. Helen held it with both hands as if it were something fragile. "Richard gave this to me about 6 months before he died," she said. "He made me promise not to mention it unless I believed you were in real danger of losing the house." I stared at the envelope, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Helen's voice softened. He said, "If the day ever comes when Melissa is being pushed out, give her this before anyone convinces her she has no ground to stand on." Tears blurred my vision. I reached for the envelope, and for the first time since Jennifer left me at that motel, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt Richard beside me. My hands trembled so badly that Helen had to slide the envelope across the table instead of handing it to me. Richard's handwriting sat there in blue ink, steady and familiar. Melissa. Just my name. Not Mrs. Moore, not legal language, not instructions, just the name he had spoken every morning for 44 years. I touched the envelope with my fingertips before I picked it up. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. It felt thick, heavy, like there was more inside than a simple letter. Helen sat across from me without speaking. The whole kitchen seemed to hold its breath. "When did he give this to you?" I asked. "Late October," she said softly. "The year before he passed?" I looked up. He was already sick then. Helen nodded. He knew more than he told most people. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Richard had always tried to protect me from worry. Even when the doctors started using careful voices and softer words, he would pat my hand and say, "One day at a time, Mel." He said it while his body grew thinner. He said it while I helped him button shirts he used to wear proudly. He said it while I pretended not to notice how long he stared at Jennifer after her visits, as if he were trying to solve a problem he could not name. I remembered one evening especially. Jennifer had come over with Brian. They had brought dinner from an expensive restaurant, something they rarely did. Brian spent most of the meal asking Richard about the house, the taxes, the title, the value of the neighborhood. I thought he was making conversation. Richard answered politely, but after they left, he sat in his study for nearly an hour with the door closed. When he came to bed, I asked him what was wrong. He kissed my forehead and said, "Nothing you need to carry tonight." I hated that sentence then. I understood it now. I slid my finger under the flap of the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter, 3 pages folded together, and behind it, copies of documents I did not yet understand. At the top of the first page, Richard had written the date, October 18th, 6 months before he died. My dear Melissa, if you are reading this, then something I feared may have come to pass, and I am sorry I am not standing beside you to face it. I stopped reading. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Helen reached over and placed her hand near mine, not touching, just close enough. I wiped my eyes and forced myself to continue. "You may be angry with me for keeping this from you. Maybe you will think I should have told you everything while I was still here. Maybe you will be right. But I knew you, Mel. I knew you would defend Jennifer until your own heart broke. You would tell me she was stressed, misunderstood, influenced by Brian, or simply careless with her words. You would forgive warning signs because you are her mother." I covered my mouth with my hand. Richard had known me too well. The letter blurred, then cleared again. "But I have seen things that trouble me. I have seen Brian ask too many questions. I have seen Jennifer listen too closely when money is mentioned. I have heard the impatience in her voice when she talks about your future, as if your life after me is an inconvenience to be managed." Helen looked away, giving me privacy from my own grief. I kept reading. "So I did what I should have done years ago. I met with Thomas Bennett and changed the way the house is protected. The deed you know about is not the whole story anymore. The house has been placed into the Moore Family Residence Trust with you as the protected lifetime beneficiary. No one can sell it while you are living unless you personally consent through proper legal process witnessed and verified by Thomas or a court-appointed attorney acting solely for you." My breath caught. I read that paragraph again, then again. The trust, I whispered. Helen leaned forward. What? He put the house in a trust. Her eyes widened. Richard did. I nodded, though I hardly understood it myself. My hands shook as I turned to the next page. Jennifer may believe she will inherit the house outright. She will not. That was never my final intention once I realized how vulnerable you could become. If she treats you with love and respect, then one day, after your time here is done, the trust allows what remains to pass according to the terms we discussed years ago. But if she tries to force you out, declare you incapable without cause pressure, you into a sale or profit from your displacement, Thomas has instructions to challenge her actions immediately. A sound escaped me. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. Richard had not just loved me, he had believed me before I even knew I would need to be believed. For days, Jennifer's voice had been pressing against my mind. You're confused, you're emotional, you don't remember, you're not safe. Every accusation had landed because some small, frightened part of me wondered whether age itself had weakened my authority over my own life. But Richard's letter sat in my hands like a railing in the dark. I was not imagining this. I was not standing on air. I had ground beneath me. I turned to the final page. Do not confront Jennifer alone if this day comes. Do not sign anything she gives you. Do not rely on family members who have only heard her version. Call Thomas Bennett. His number is attached. Helen has been given this envelope because I trust her to act when others hesitate. And Mel, listen to me now. That house is not just wood and paint. It is the record of your labor, your patience, your forgiveness, your motherhood, your marriage, and your courage. Do not let anyone convince you that needing kindness means surrendering your dignity. You are not a burden. You are my wife. You are the heart of that home. Richard, I pressed the letter to my chest and cried in a way I had not cried since the funeral. Not quietly, not politely. I cried until my shoulders shook. I cried for the man who had seen danger coming while I still wanted to call it concern. I cried for the daughter I had loved so much that I had refused to recognize her greed. I cried for the motel room, the changed lock, the missing porch swing, the photographs turned face down, the relatives who had believed I was losing myself. And underneath all of that, I cried because Richard still knew how to reach me. Helen came around this table and wrapped her arms around me. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. When I could finally breathe again, I unfolded the documents behind the letter. There were copies of legal forms, pages marked with Thomas Bennett's office letterhead, and one document labeled Certificate of Trust. Another page had a reference to a recorded deed transfer dated almost 4 years earlier. 4 years. Before Richard's final decline. Before Jennifer started asking questions. Before Brian began circling my hallway like a man measuring walls for profit. He did this before he died, I said. Helen nodded. He told me he hoped you'd never need it. I looked at the phone number stapled to the back page. Thomas Bennett. I remembered him as a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes, the kind of attorney who spoke slowly because he wanted people to understand, not because he enjoyed hearing himself talk. He handled our wills years ago. He handled the estate after Richard passed. I had not thought to call him because Jennifer had made me feel like the problem was personal, not legal. That was another trap. People who want to take from you often make the harm feel private, so you will be ashamed to seek public help. I reached for my phone, then I stopped. What time is it? I asked. Helen checked the wall clock. Almost 7. Too late to call an office. Call anyway. There may be voicemail. I dialed before fear could talk me out of it. The office recording answered after 3 rings. You have reached Bennett & Lowe Attorneys at Law. My throat tightened when I heard the familiar name. After the beep, I left a message. My name is Melissa Moore. I am Richard Moore's widow. I have a letter from my husband instructing me to contact Mr. Thomas Bennett regarding the Moore Family Residence Trust. My daughter has removed me from my home, changed the locks, and listed the property for sale. I need help. My voice cracked at the last word. I almost hung up, then added, please, I need help. When I ended the call, the room felt different. Nothing had been solved. Jennifer still had my house. Brian still had my files. The listing was still online. My relatives still thought I was confused. I still had nowhere to sleep except Helen's guest room or that awful motel. But the terror had shifted. It no longer owned me completely. Helen placed the letter carefully back into the envelope. You're staying here tonight, she said. I don't want to put you in the middle. Helen gave me a sharp look. I was in the middle the moment your husband trusted me with this. I almost smiled. She made up the guest room while I sat at the table reading Richard's letter one more time. Every sentence felt like a hand on my shoulder. I imagined him sitting in his study, knowing he was running out of time, still thinking not of himself, but of how to keep me safe after he was gone. Later that night, as I lay in Helen's guest bed under a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender, my phone lit up. A text from Jennifer. Mom, we need to talk tomorrow. You are making this worse for yourself. I stared at the words. Then, for the first time, I did not answer. I turned the phone face down and placed Richard's letter on the nightstand beside me. Jennifer thought she had moved me out of the way, but she had pushed me straight toward the one secret Richard had left behind to stop her. I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. The room was unfamiliar. Pale yellow walls, a wooden dresser with a porcelain lamp, floral curtains moving gently in the morning breeze from the cracked window. Then I saw the manila envelope on the nightstand. Everything came rushing back. The motel, the changed locks, the for sale sign, Richard's letter, Jennifer. I sat up slowly and reached for the envelope before my feet even touched the floor. I read the last paragraph again. You are not a burden. Those 4 words stayed with me longer than anything else. When someone spends days telling you that you're confused, incapable, and in the way you begin to question parts of yourself you never questioned before. Richard had somehow anticipated that. He hadn't just left me legal protection. He had left me emotional protection. That morning, I walked into Helen's kitchen carrying the letter like something sacred. Helen was already making pancakes. She smiled gently. I thought you might finally be hungry. I think I am. She placed a plate in front of me. It was the first real meal I had eaten in almost 2 days. For a while, neither of us talked. Finally, Helen asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the window overlooking my own backyard. From Helen's kitchen, I could see the top of my maple tree. My husband told me exactly what to do. Helen nodded. Thomas Bennett. Thomas Bennett. Almost as if my words had summoned him. My phone rang. Unknown number. My heart started racing. Hello. A calm, familiar voice answered. Mrs. Moore? Yes. This is Thomas Bennett. For a second, I couldn't speak. It's been too long, Melissa. His voice sounded older than I remembered, but just as steady. I received your voicemail before the office officially opened. I'm sorry to call so early. You never need to apologize for asking for help. Those words nearly made me cry again. Thomas continued. I have Richard's files in front of me. My fingers tightened around the coffee mug. You still have everything. I have everything Richard instructed me to keep. I closed my eyes. Richard. Even after death, he had organized my rescue. Thomas's voice became more professional. I need you to answer several questions honestly. Of course. Have you signed any documents regarding the sale of your home? No. Any power of attorney? No. Any guardianship papers? No. Has anyone pressured you to sign anything? Not yet. Has anyone prevented you from entering your residence? Yes. When? Yesterday. Witnesses. Helen Brooks. I'll need her statement. Helen immediately nodded from across the table. I'll give it. Thomas continued asking questions. Every answer seemed to strengthen something. When I finished describing everything from the motel to the realtor to Jennifer telling relatives I was losing my memory, Thomas was silent for several seconds. Finally, he sighed. I was afraid this day might come. You knew. I knew Richard was worried. What exactly did he tell you? Thomas hesitated. Melissa, Richard loved Jennifer. I know. He never wanted to believe she would intentionally hurt you. I looked down at Richard's letter. But he believed Brian had a dangerous influence. That didn't surprise me. Not anymore. Thomas continued. Several years ago, Brian began asking Richard unusual questions. What kind? Questions about inheritance. I frowned. Richard never told me. He didn't want you caught between your husband and your daughter. That sounded exactly like Richard. He asked about the deed. My head lifted. When? Almost 4 years ago. Before Richard became seriously ill. Yes. Thomas shuffled papers on his desk. I made notes. I heard pages turning. Here. He cleared his throat and began reading. Brian Carter requested clarification regarding survivorship rights and property transfer upon owner's death. Client appeared uncomfortable. Requested private consultation following meeting. I stared ahead. So Brian questioned him. Repeatedly. What did Richard think? Thomas answered carefully. He believed Brian was asking questions too early. Too early. Not whether. When. I suddenly remembered dozens of little moments. Brian volunteering to organize Richard's office. Brian asking where the safe deposit box was located. Brian offering to simplify financial paperwork. At the time, I thought he was trying to be helpful. Now, every memory looked different. Thomas spoke again. Richard asked me a question during our final planning meeting. What was it? Can someone manipulate an elderly spouse into giving away a home? The room fell completely silent. Helen slowly lowered her coffee cup. Thomas continued. I explained the legal risks. And And Richard immediately asked me how to prevent it. Tears blurred my vision again. He wasn't protecting the house. No, Thomas's voice softened. He was protecting you. I covered my face. For months before Richard died, I had believed he was simply trying to organize paperwork because he knew his health was failing. I never imagined every signature had been another layer of armor wrapped around me. Thomas let me collect myself before continuing. I want you to bring every document Richard left. I have the letter. The trust papers. Yes. The certificate. Yes. Good. He paused. I also have the original. I looked up sharply. The original, locked in our fireproof archive. My heart skipped. So Jennifer doesn't have it? No. What does she have? My guess, Thomas answered immediately. A copy of the old deed. The one before Richard updated everything. Exactly. A strange feeling spread through me. Hope. Real hope. For the first time since Jennifer dropped me at that motel, I realized something. She wasn't acting like someone who knew she had already won. She was acting like someone rushing before she lost. Thomas interrupted my thoughts. Melissa, yes. I need to ask something difficult. I'm listening. Has Jennifer mentioned guardianship? I swallowed. Yesterday. What exactly did she say? She said they might need legal options until I was stable. Thomas sighed heavily. I suspected that. Is it serious? Very. Why? Because once someone files for emergency guardianship, the court often moves quickly. A chill ran through me. So she could attempt to gain temporary authority over your financial decisions. My house, if successful. I couldn't breathe. Thomas immediately continued. But that single word stopped my panic. She won't succeed. How can you know that? Because she doesn't know what Richard and I prepared. He spoke with complete confidence. And because I know judges. That surprised me. What do you mean? I've practiced probate and estate law in Franklin County for 38 years. He chuckled quietly. I've appeared before Judge Eleanor Hayes more times than I can count. The name sounded familiar. I've heard of her. She's thorough. Is that good? It's excellent. He became serious again. Judge Hayes dislikes two things. What? Elder abuse. And adult children who mistake inheritance for ownership. For the first time in days, I smiled. Only a little. But it was real. Thomas continued outlining a plan. I want you in my office today. When? 1 o'clock. I'll be there. Bring Helen. Helen immediately nodded. I'll drive. Good. Thomas wasn't finished. I'll also need photographs. Of what? The changed locks. The listing sign. The realtor if possible. I have the online listing. Print it. Helen already did. Excellent. He paused once more. And Melissa. Yes. I want you to understand something before we meet. I'm listening. Do not let Jennifer convince you that this case is about family. I frowned. It isn't. No. His voice became firm. This case is about property rights, fiduciary responsibility, elder coercion, and fraudulent representation. The legal words sounded intimidating. Thomas seemed to notice. In plain English, please. Someone tried to take your home. The simplicity of that sentence hit harder than every legal term combined. Yes, that was exactly what had happened. Not a misunderstanding, not concern, not family conflict. Someone had tried to take my home. After the call ended, Helen stared at me. What did he say? I looked down at Richard's letter, then back at Helen. Finally, I smiled a tired smile, but stronger than yesterday. He said Richard planned for everything. Helen smiled too. I knew that man. I laughed softly. So did I. An hour later, we drove past my house on the way to the print shop. The for sale sign was still there. So was Brian's SUV. As we slowed near the curb, I noticed someone walking through my living room with a measuring tape. Another stranger. Planning, measuring, preparing. Helen tightened her grip on the steering wheel. We should keep going. I nodded. Not because I was afraid, because now I had something far more valuable than anger. I had evidence. And somewhere across town, Thomas Bennett was opening Richard Moore's original file. Neither Jennifer nor Brian had any idea that the one document they believed no longer existed had been waiting quietly in a fireproof cabinet for 4 years. They thought they had locked me out of my own home. They had no idea Richard had already locked them out of ever owning it. By 12:30 that afternoon, Helen and I were pulling into the parking lot of Bennett and Lowe Attorneys at Law. The building was older than most of the offices downtown, a 3-story red brick structure with white columns and polished brass lettering beside the entrance. Richard had always liked coming here. He used to joke that Thomas Bennett's office looked trustworthy because nothing inside had changed since 1985. As I stepped out of Helen's car, I felt my stomach twist. This was the first time I had entered this building without Richard beside me. The receptionist looked up as soon as we walked in. "Mrs. Moore?" I nodded. "Mr. Bennett is expecting you." She didn't ask me to fill out forms. She didn't ask me to wait. She simply smiled with a kindness that made me feel like someone believed me before I had even spoken. Thomas Bennett stood outside his office before I reached the hallway. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was almost completely white now, and his shoulders had rounded slightly with age, but his eyes were exactly the same, steady, observant, and impossible to fool. "Melissa." He stepped forward and took both of my hands. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "So do I." For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he looked at Helen. "You must be Helen Brooks." "I am." Richard's old attorney smiled warmly. "My client always spoke very highly of you." Helen looked surprised. "He did?" Thomas nodded. "He once told me that if anything ever happened to him, you'd be the first neighbor to notice something wasn't right." Helen looked down, blinking back tears. "I wish he hadn't been right." Thomas led us into his office. Everything inside felt familiar. The oak bookshelves, the framed law degree, the grandfather clock in the corner. Even the smell of leather-bound books and coffee reminded me of the afternoons Richard used to spend reviewing paperwork while I sat beside him reading a magazine. Thomas waited until we were seated before speaking. "I spent the morning reviewing every document Richard ever signed with this firm." He opened a thick file. Across the tab in neat handwriting were the words, "Richard and Melissa Moore, Estate Planning." Seeing our names together made my throat tighten. Thomas carefully removed several documents. "First," he said, "I want you to understand exactly what Richard created." He placed a copy of the trust agreement in front of me. "This is the Moore Family Residence Trust." I looked at the heading. The legal language felt overwhelming. Thomas noticed immediately. "Let me translate." "Please." He folded his hands. "The trust owns the house." I frowned. "But Richard and I owned the house." "You did." "So how can the trust own it?" "Because Richard transferred legal title into the trust while preserving your lifetime rights." I tried to follow. "So?" Thomas smiled patiently. "You may live there for the rest of your life." "I know." "No one, not Jennifer, not Brian, not future heirs, can force the sale while you're mentally competent." Helen leaned forward. "And she is." Thomas nodded. "Exactly." He looked directly at me. "Melissa competency is a legal standard." Jennifer's words echoed in my mind. "You're confused, you're emotional, you're forgetting things," Thomas continued. "Crying doesn't make someone incompetent." I swallowed. "Neither does grief." I nodded slowly. "Neither does being 70. Another nod. "In fact," Thomas said, "many 70-year-olds are perfectly capable of managing their own affairs." I felt something inside me relax. Jennifer had spent days making my age sound like evidence. Thomas made it sound completely ordinary. He opened another folder. "Now," his voice became more serious, "we need to discuss what Jennifer has done." He spread photographs across the desk, the online listing, the realtor advertisement, screenshots from the property website. There was my house again. Only this time Thomas viewed it differently. "Notice something." I looked carefully. "What?" "The listing says seller represented by family." "So, legally," he tapped the page, "Jennifer cannot represent the seller." I stared at him. "Because she's not the owner." "Correct." He tapped again. "And she has no power of attorney." Another tap. "And she has no guardianship." Another. "And no court order." He leaned back. "Do you know what that means?" I shook my head. "It means every representation she made to the realtor may be false." Helen slowly smiled. "That's serious." "It can be." Thomas reached for another document. "The realtor likely acted in good faith." "You think so?" "Most agents verify ownership." He pointed to the listing. "But they also rely on information provided by clients." "So Jennifer lied." "We don't know exactly what she said. Yet." That last word caught my attention. "Yet." Thomas nodded. "I'm going to find out." He reached for his phone. "I've already contacted Palmer and Reed Realty." I blinked. "You have?" "About 30 minutes ago." "And?" "They're sending someone." I looked at Helen. Helen looked back at me. "The realtor." Thomas smiled. The managing broker. I had barely processed those words when there was a knock at the office door. Thomas glanced at the clock. Perfect timing. His assistant opened the door. A woman in her late 50s entered carrying a leather portfolio. She looked nervous, very nervous. "Mrs. Palmer," Thomas said. She nodded. "Thank you for coming." She looked toward me. "You must be Mrs. Moore." "I am." I'd like to apologize." I frowned. "For what?" She placed the portfolio on Thomas's desk. "As soon as Mr. Bennett contacted our office, I personally reviewed the file." She took a deep breath. "There are several things that concern me." Thomas remained silent. He wanted her to explain. Mrs. Palmer opened the file. "The listing appointment was conducted 2 days ago." "With Jennifer?" I asked. "Yes. And Brian Carter." She continued reading. "They represented themselves as the individuals responsible for managing the property." "Did they say they owned it?" Mrs. Palmer hesitated. "They implied Mrs. Moore," she glanced at me apologetically, "was no longer capable of making independent decisions." Helen inhaled sharply. "They actually said that—" Mrs. Palmer nodded. "They informed our agent that legal authority was being finalized." Thomas looked at her. "What does being finalized mean?" Mrs. Palmer sighed. "It appears they suggested guardianship paperwork would be completed shortly." I felt my heart pounding. "They hadn't even filed anything." Thomas nodded. "Exactly," Mrs. Palmer continued. "Our agent requested ownership documentation." I leaned forward. "What did Jennifer give her?" Mrs. Palmer removed a photocopy. "This." Thomas smiled slightly. I recognized it immediately. The old deed. Richard's original ownership document, not the updated trust transfer. Mrs. Palmer looked confused. "Our agent believed this established ownership." Thomas slid another document beside it. "The trust deed. The recorded transfer." Both papers lay side by side. Mrs. Palmer stared at them. "Oh." She whispered it so quietly I almost missed it. "Oh my goodness." Thomas folded his hands. "The second document supersedes the first." Mrs. Palmer looked horrified. "We didn't know." "I believe you." She turned toward me. "Mrs. Moore?" Her eyes filled with genuine regret. "If we had known." I interrupted gently. "You were deceived too." She nodded gratefully. "I've already ordered the listing removed." That surprised me. "You have immediately." She reached for another sheet. "And we've suspended all marketing activity." I looked down at my hands. The house was no longer being advertised. For the first time since Jennifer left me at that motel, one piece of my home had been reclaimed. Mrs. Palmer wasn't finished. "Our legal department also advised us to preserve every email, text message, recorded call, and signed document relating to this transaction." Thomas smiled. "Excellent advice." She looked embarrassed. "I believe law enforcement or the court may eventually request them." Helen slowly exhaled. Jennifer had left a trail. Emails, contracts, messages. Everything she believed would sell my house might now save it. Mrs. Palmer stood. "I truly am sorry." I looked into her eyes. She wasn't pretending. She had been manipulated just as surely as everyone else. "I accept your apology." She hesitated. "May I ask one question?" "Of course." "Why would someone do this to their own mother?" The room became painfully quiet. I answered honestly. "I've been asking myself that every hour." After she left, Thomas closed the office door. His expression changed. He no longer looked relieved. He looked concerned. "What is it?" I asked. He remained silent for several seconds. "Removing the listing is good." "It is." "But—" I had begun to hate that word. "But—" Thomas folded his hands. "I checked the county court records this morning." My stomach tightened. "And there wasn't a guardianship filing." I let out a breath. "So, that's good." Thomas looked directly into my eyes. "It wasn't there." He paused. "This morning." The room became completely still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Jennifer may realize the house cannot be sold." I nodded. "And when she realizes that—" His voice became very quiet. "She may move to her next plan." "What plan?" Thomas reached into the file. He removed a freshly printed court notification. It had arrived by electronic filing only minutes earlier. He slid it slowly across the desk toward me. Across the top in bold letters were the words, "Petition for Emergency Temporary Guardianship filed by Jennifer Carter. Against Melissa Moore. Filed less than 45 minutes earlier." For a long moment I simply stared at the court filing, The words blurred together until they looked like black smudges on white paper. Petition for emergency temporary guardianship. My name was there. Melissa Ann Moore. The petitioner was listed as Jennifer Carter, my daughter. Not a stranger, not a dishonest contractor, not a scam artist. The little girl whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose nightmares I had soothed, whose college tuition Richard and I had worked overtime to pay. I looked up at Thomas. She actually filed it. He nodded once. She did. My voice barely came out. On what grounds? Thomas adjusted his glasses and turned several pages. Let's read exactly what she told the court. He began reading aloud. Petitioner believes respondent is no longer capable of independently managing her financial affairs due to progressive cognitive decline. I closed my eyes. Progressive cognitive decline. Jennifer had turned my grief into a diagnosis. Thomas continued. Respondent has recently demonstrated confusion regarding her residents' irrational distrust of close family members, impaired judgment, and an inability to appreciate the risks associated with living alone. Helen let out a sharp breath. That's outrageous. Thomas wasn't finished. Respondent recently left temporary accommodations without notice, created a public disturbance at the residence, and displayed increasingly erratic emotional behavior. He placed the papers back on the desk. There it is. I felt numb. She used the motel. Yes. She used my coming home. Yes. She used everything she created to support the guardianship petition. Thomas completed my sentence quietly. The room became painfully silent. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing inside me since I first saw the filing. Could she win? Thomas did not answer immediately. Instead, he folded his hands and looked directly at me. I need you to listen carefully. I am. Emergency guardianships exist for good reasons. I nodded. They protect people who truly cannot protect themselves. Another nod. But, again that word, they are sometimes abused. How they can be used to gain immediate control before the other person has time to defend themselves. A cold chill traveled through my body. So Jennifer wants control first. Exactly. Then she can sell the house. Thomas didn't answer. He didn't have to. I already knew. Helen leaned forward. What happens next? Thomas pointed to the filing. The court has scheduled a preliminary hearing. When? He checked the notice. Friday morning. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Today was Tuesday. 3 days. Jennifer had given me a motel room, then a locked door. Now she was giving me 3 days to prove I still owned my own mind. Thomas interrupted my thoughts. We're going to fight this. His confidence steadied me. How? With evidence. He began making notes on a yellow legal pad. I need medical records. I have annual checkups. Excellent. I had a complete physical 4 months ago. Perfect. What else but witnesses? Helen. Definitely. He wrote her name. Helen Brooks. Who else? I thought for a moment. My family doctor. Good. The pharmacist who knows me. Very good. My pastor. Excellent. He smiled for the first time. Jennifer made one mistake. Only one. He chuckled softly. Her biggest mistake. What? She assumed nobody else knows you. That struck me. He was right. Jennifer had created a story. But dozens of people had seen me living my normal life, buying groceries, driving to church, volunteering twice a week at the local food pantry, attending book club every Thursday, helping organize neighborhood yard sales. None of that looked like someone incapable of making decisions. Thomas kept writing. We'll subpoena records if necessary. I blinked. Subpoena. If someone doesn't cooperate. Helen smiled. I don't think your doctor will need convincing. Thomas nodded. Probably not. He stood and walked toward one of his filing cabinets. When he returned, he carried another folder. This belonged to Richard. He placed it carefully in front of me. I've never shown anyone this. I looked at the label. Private notes. My heart skipped. What is it? Richard asked me to keep personal meeting notes. You took notes. I always do. He opened the folder. I think you should hear one. He adjusted his glasses. Meeting dated November 12th. That was almost 6 months before Richard died. Thomas began reading. Client expresses concern regarding increasing financial curiosity displayed by daughter and son-in-law. My stomach tightened. Client requests legal methods to ensure spouse cannot be pressured into involuntary property transfer. Another page. Client states spouse trusts daughter completely and would likely sign documents if convinced they were for her own protection. I covered my mouth. That was true. Painfully true. Richard knew me. Thomas continued. Client requests multiple legal safeguards requiring independent legal review before any residential sale. He looked up. Melissa. His voice softened. Richard anticipated coercion. I stared at the notes. He planned all this years ago. He never told me. Thomas closed the folder gently. He wanted you to continue loving Jennifer. Those words broke something inside me. Because that was exactly what Richard would have wanted. He hadn't hidden the truth because he distrusted me. He hid it because he knew I would spend his final months trying to repair a relationship that might already have been breaking. He wanted me to spend those months loving our daughter, not fearing her. Tears rolled silently down my face. Helen reached over and squeezed my shoulder. Thomas quietly handed me a tissue. No one spoke for almost a minute. Eventually I whispered, "I miss him." Thomas smiled sadly. "So do I." He looked toward the window. "Richard was one of the finest men I've ever represented." He was. "He talked about you constantly." I laughed through tears. "I'm sure he complained sometimes." Thomas actually laughed. "Only once." "Really? You burned the Thanksgiving pie?" I couldn't help smiling. "Oh, no," he said. Thomas grinned as he remembered. "Melissa makes terrible pumpkin pie every fourth Thanksgiving, but if I mention it, she'll make me eat the leftovers for a week." Helen burst into laughter. I laughed too. For just a few seconds, Richard was alive again. Not in memory, in conversation, in humor, in love. The laughter faded gently. Thomas became serious once more. "We have work to do." He handed me a legal pad. "I want you to write." "What?" "Everything. Everything by every conversation." He pointed toward the paper. "When Jennifer first started asking about the deed." I wrote, "The motel." I wrote, "The changed locks." I wrote, "The realtor." I wrote, "The phone calls." I wrote, "The relatives." I wrote, "For nearly 2 hours, I reconstructed every detail I could remember. Dates, times, exact words, every lie, every promise, every manipulation." Thomas occasionally interrupted. "What color was the folder Jennifer carried?" "Dark blue." "What day did Brian ask about the deed?" "Sunday after church." "What exactly did Jennifer say about the motel?" "Just 3 or 4 nights." He wrote everything. Nothing seemed too small. When we finally finished, Thomas organized the papers into separate folders. Evidence, witnesses, timeline, medical, trust documents. I stared at the neat stacks. It looked like preparation for war. Perhaps it was. As Helen and I stood to leave, Thomas walked us to the elevator. Before the doors opened, he stopped me. "Melissa?" "Yes." "I have one request." "What is it?" "No matter what Jennifer says between now and Friday." He paused. "Do not meet with her alone." I nodded. "I won't." "I mean it." "I understand." People become unpredictable when they realize a plan is failing. Those words stayed with me all the way to Helen's car. As we pulled out of the parking garage, my phone vibrated. Jennifer. I stared at the screen. It rang again, and again, then stopped. A text appeared. "Mom, we need to talk privately tonight. No lawyers, no neighbors, just us. I can still fix this if you'll listen." I handed the phone to Helen. She read the message and slowly shook her head. "She's scared." I looked out the window toward the afternoon traffic. "No." "What?" I remembered Thomas's warning. People become unpredictable when they realize a plan is failing. I took a slow breath. "I think she's running out of time." Neither of us noticed the black SUV that had been parked across the street from Thomas's office, or that it quietly pulled into traffic a few cars behind us. Brian had already started following us. I didn't notice Brian's SUV behind us. Not then. Helen drove carefully through downtown Columbus while I stared out the passenger window, replaying every word Thomas had said. My mind kept circling back to one sentence. People become unpredictable when they realize a plan is failing. At first, I thought he meant Jennifer. It never occurred to me that Brian might be the one with the most to lose. Helen glanced at me as we stopped at a traffic light. "You've been quiet." "I've been thinking." "About Richard?" I smiled faintly. "Always." The light turned green. "But today," I continued, "I'm also thinking about Jennifer." Helen sighed. "I know. I keep asking myself when I lost her." "You didn't lose her overnight." "No. You loved the little girl she was." I nodded. "And she loved you." "I believe she did." Helen kept her eyes on the road. "Sometimes people don't become cruel all at once." "What do you mean?" "They make one selfish decision." She paused. Then another. And another. until they have to keep lying to protect the first lie. I thought about that for the rest of the drive. Jennifer hadn't started by changing my locks. She had started years earlier by asking harmless questions. Where are Dad's papers? Is the mortgage paid off? Do you still have the deed? At the time, they sounded like concern. Now they sounded like reconnaissance. When we reached Helen's house, I noticed something unusual. A white envelope had been tucked under her front door. No stamp, Helen said. She picked it up. There was no return address, only one word written across the front. Melissa. My heart skipped. For one terrifying second, I thought it might somehow be another letter from Richard. But the handwriting was different, sharper, more hurried. Helen handed it to me. You should open it. Inside was a single folded sheet of printer paper. No signature, no greeting. Just one typed sentence. Stop fighting before you lose everything. My hands became cold. Helen took the paper from me. That's not Richard's typewriter. Despite the fear rising inside me, I almost laughed. Richard never owned a typewriter. She looked back at the page. No fingerprints, probably. I stared at the message. No demand, no explanation, just a threat. Helen walked immediately to her kitchen drawer and pulled out a clear plastic folder. What are you doing? Protecting evidence. She carefully slid the paper inside without touching it again. Richard had chosen his friends well. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jennifer, it was Thomas. Melissa. Thomas. I forgot to ask one important question. What is it? Has anyone besides Jennifer and Brian entered Richard's study recently? I thought carefully. No. You're certain? As far as I know. He was quiet for a moment. I reviewed Richard's inventory list. Inventory? Every document stored in that office. I frowned. You kept a list? Richard insisted. That sounded exactly like my husband. Thomas continued. There should have been a small black ledger. I searched my memory. I remember it. Leather cover. With gold corners. Exactly. What about it? It isn't in the trust archive. It was at home. Richard deliberately kept it there. My stomach tightened. What was inside? Nothing legally essential. Then why is it important? Thomas hesitated. It contained a handwritten record. Of what? Major financial decisions. I frowned. Like check registers? No. He lowered his voice. Private observations. My pulse quickened. What kind of observations? Richard occasionally documented conversations that concerned him. I closed my eyes. Oh, he told me once. Thomas searched his memory. If I ever can't explain why I made certain legal decisions, that notebook will. Helen had been listening quietly. She immediately understood. They took boxes out of Richard's study. Thomas answered. Exactly. My stomach sank. They may have the ledger. They may. And if they do, it depends. On what? Whether they read it. I thought about Jennifer. She wasn't patient enough to read an old notebook cover to cover. Brian, however, Brian would. Thomas spoke again. If they realize what's inside, they may destroy it. A wave of panic hit me. Can we stop them? I don't know. What if... He interrupted gently. Melissa. Yes. Did Richard ever tell you where he kept copies? I searched my memory. No. Thomas sighed. I hoped he had. After we ended the call, Helen looked thoughtful. Richard made copies of everything. He did. So why wouldn't he copy that? I looked at her. I don't know. Then something flickered in my memory. A Christmas years ago. Richard sitting in his study. 2 notebooks. Not one. I frowned. Helen. What? I may have seen another one. When? I can't remember. She smiled. You just proved Jennifer wrong. I blinked. What? You remembered something. Despite everything, I laughed. So I did. She pointed at me. Your memory isn't failing. No. It's working. I suddenly realized something. Every time Jennifer claimed I was confused, I had started doubting memories that turned out to be accurate. That was exactly how manipulation worked. It wasn't about proving I had forgotten. It was about making me distrust myself. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Thomas emailed copies of several trust documents for me to review. Helen helped organize photographs and timelines. I sorted through my purse and realized something else. My house key. The old brass key Richard had given me. I turned it over in my palm. The edges were worn smooth after 4 decades of use. Worthless now, yet I couldn't throw it away. It still belongs to my house, I whispered. Helen smiled sadly. And your house still belongs to you. Around 6 o'clock, there was another knock at the front door. Both of us froze. Helen looked through the peephole. "It's Jennifer." My heart began pounding. She was alone. At least that's what it looked like. Helen opened the door only a few inches. "What do you want?" Jennifer looked exhausted. Her makeup was smudged. Her hair wasn't as perfectly styled as usual. For the first time in days, she looked frightened. "I need to talk to my mother." Helen didn't move. "You can talk right there." Jennifer looked past her. "Mom." I stepped into the hallway. "What do you want?" Her eyes filled with tears. Real tears this time, or at least they looked real. "I'm sorry." The words caught me completely off guard. "What?" "I'm sorry things got so out of control." Helen crossed her arms. "What does that mean?" Jennifer ignored her. "Mom, please." I stayed where I was. "You filed for guardianship." She looked down. "I had to." "No." My voice was calm. "You chose to." She swallowed. "You don't understand the pressure." "What pressure?" She hesitated. Then, for the first time, I saw genuine panic in her face. "Brian!" She stopped. "What about Brian?" She looked over her shoulder toward the street, almost nervously, then back at me. "I made mistakes." "I know. But Brian said—" She stopped again. Helen noticed it too. "What did Brian say?" Jennifer's breathing became faster. Suddenly, headlights swept across Helen's front yard. A black SUV pulled sharply to the curb. "Brian." He climbed out before the engine was even off. "Jennifer." His voice was cold. "What are you doing?" Jennifer turned around. "I was just talking." "You've talked enough." He walked toward the porch. His smile appeared the moment he saw me. Artificial, controlled. "Melissa." I didn't answer. Brian looked at Jennifer. "We're leaving." "I need another minute." "No." His tone wasn't angry. It was commanding. Jennifer looked smaller than I had ever seen her. For the first time in my life, I watched my daughter look afraid of her own husband. Brian took her arm. Not violently, but firmly enough that she flinched. That tiny movement changed everything. Jennifer looked back at me. Our eyes met for only a second. She wanted to say something. I could see it. Whatever it was, Brian didn't intend to let her. He guided her toward the SUV. Before getting inside, Jennifer looked over her shoulder one last time. Her lips moved silently. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew exactly what she mouthed. "Help me." The SUV sped away before I could react. Helen stood beside me in stunned silence. Finally, she whispered, "Melissa." I kept staring at the empty street. I don't think Brian was ever following Jennifer's plan. "What do you mean?" A terrible realization settled over me. I struggled to say the words. Jennifer may have been following his. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered whether my daughter wasn't just betraying me. She might also be trapped by the man standing beside her. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid of losing my house anymore. That fear had changed. Now I was afraid of losing what little remained of my daughter. Jennifer's silent plea haunted me. Help me. Had I imagined it? Had I wanted so desperately to believe there was still good in her that I had seen something that wasn't there? Or had I finally seen the frightened little girl hiding beneath the woman who had lied to everyone she loved? I lay awake until dawn asking myself those questions. By 7 o'clock, I was dressed and sitting at Helen's kitchen table when Thomas called. "Good morning, Melissa." "It doesn't feel like one." "I understand." His voice was calm, measured exactly what I needed. "The hearing is tomorrow morning." "I know. I've spent most of the night preparing." "So have I." "I also received several documents after we spoke yesterday." That caught my attention. "What kind of documents?" "The realtor's complete file. And every email Jennifer and Brian exchanged with Palmer and Reed Realty." I leaned forward. "Did you find anything important?" "I found something very interesting." He paused. "The first person to contact the realtor wasn't Jennifer." I frowned. "It wasn't?" "No." "Then who?" "Brian." That didn't surprise me nearly as much as I expected it to. Thomas continued. "He contacted them almost 3 weeks before your motel stay." I looked at Helen. Helen slowly shook her head. 3 weeks. Yes. He planned all this that far in advance. It appears so. Thomas shuffled papers. The first email simply requested a market evaluation. And after that, the second asked what documents would be required to sell a home owned by an elderly parent. My stomach tightened. He was already planning. Exactly. Thomas read another email. Owner may soon require assistance managing affairs. Family expects transition to occur quickly. I closed my eyes. Transition. That was how Brian described removing me from my own home. Thomas wasn't finished. There are 17 emails. 17, most were written by Brian. What about Jennifer? She replied to several. My heart sank. So she knew. She knew. I lowered my head. For just one night, I had allowed myself to believe Brian had manipulated her into everything. Now I wasn't so sure. Thomas interrupted my thoughts. However, that familiar word again. There's something else. What? The tone changes. What do you mean? The early emails are mostly Brian. And later, Jennifer begins asking questions. What kind? Thomas read directly from one message. Are we sure this is the only way? I looked up immediately. What? That's exactly what she wrote. He continued. Brian replied. There was another pause. Stop second-guessing everything. Once the guardianship is approved, she'll have no choice. A chill ran through me. So, Jennifer hesitated. At least once. I remembered the way she had looked on Helen's porch the night before. Afraid, ashamed, trying to say something. Maybe I hadn't imagined it after all. Thomas spoke again. I don't want to excuse Jennifer. I'm not. But people often make terrible decisions under pressure. I know. The court won't decide whether she's a good daughter. No. It will decide whether she lied. I nodded, and I think she did. After hanging up, Helen placed another cup of coffee in front of me. You look different today. I feel different. How? I still don't know whether I can forgive Jennifer. Helen nodded. But I think I finally understand something. What? I've been trying to answer the wrong question. She waited. The question isn't whether Brian influenced her. No, the question is when she stopped saying no. Helen smiled sadly. That's a harder question. Much harder. At 9 that morning, my family doctor, Dr. Susan Reynolds, agreed to meet us before the hearing. She had cared for Richard and me for nearly 20 years. The moment she walked into the examination room, she hugged me. I'm so sorry you're going through this. So am I. She looked genuinely confused. When Thomas called yesterday, I thought there had to be some mistake. What do you mean? He told me your daughter claims you're suffering cognitive decline. I laughed softly. I'm afraid that's the story. Dr. Reynolds opened my medical file. I examined you 4 months ago. I remember. You passed every cognitive screening. She turned the computer monitor toward me. Perfect score. I blinked. Perfect on every category. Memory, attention, language, problem-solving, executive function, all normal. Dr. Reynolds smiled. You even corrected one of my questions. I laughed. I did. You told me the historical date I quoted was wrong. Helen laughed out loud. That sounds like Melissa. Dr. Reynolds became serious again. I'll testify if necessary. You would? Absolutely. She signed an affidavit stating that I was fully competent to manage my own affairs. When she handed it to me, I felt another piece of Jennifer's story crumble. After lunch, Thomas gathered everyone in his conference room. Helen, Dr. Reynolds, my pastor, Reverend James Holloway. Even Mrs. Palmer from the real estate office had agreed to appear if needed. Looking around the room, I realized something. Jennifer had tried to isolate me. Instead, she had reminded me how many people truly knew me. Thomas stood at the head of the table. We're ready. He pointed toward the timeline we had built. It tells a very clear story. He reviewed everything. Brian's emails, the motel, the changed locks, the false listing, the guardianship filing, Richard's trust, the medical records, the witness statements, everything fit together. Then Thomas looked directly at me. Melissa. Yes. Tomorrow, Jennifer's attorney may ask painful questions. I know. They may suggest you're forgetful. I understand. They may try to make you emotional. I smiled gently. I probably will be. Thomas smiled back. Being emotional doesn't make you incompetent. Those words stayed with me. Late that afternoon, just as we finished reviewing testimony, Thomas's assistant knocked on the conference room door. Mr. Bennett? Yes. Someone left this at reception. She handed him a sealed envelope. No return address. Thomas opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. He read it once, then again. His expression changed. What is it? I asked. He handed it to me. There was only one sentence. Withdraw before tomorrow or everyone learns what Richard never told Melissa. The room fell silent. I stared at the words. Helen looked over my shoulder. What does that mean? I slowly looked at Thomas. His face had gone pale. He took a slow breath. He stopped. Thomas. He removed his glasses. There is. Another long pause. There is one thing Richard asked me never to reveal unless it became absolutely necessary. My heart began pounding. What thing? Thomas looked directly into my eyes. I had hoped I would take that secret to my grave. Every person in the room waited. Finally, he spoke. If Jennifer forces this case all the way through court, he swallowed. I may have no choice but to tell the judge what Richard discovered about Brian 4 years before he died. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence inside Thomas Bennett's conference room was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking through the wall. I looked at him, then at the anonymous note still lying on the table. Richard discovered something about Brian? Thomas slowly nodded. He did. And you never told me? I couldn't. His answer stung, though not because I was angry. Why? Because Richard made me promise. I lowered myself into the nearest chair. Then tell me now. Thomas remained standing. I will. He looked around the room. Helen, Reverend Holloway, Dr. Reynolds, I apologize in advance. This concerns a confidential conversation I had with Richard. I am sharing it only because I believe it has become directly relevant to this case. Everyone nodded. Thomas opened Richard's file once more. Near the back was a sealed envelope with his own handwriting across the front. Confidential memorandum release. Only if Melissa's property is threatened. He carefully broke the seal. I wrote this after a meeting with Richard. He adjusted his glasses. About 4 years before Richard passed away, Brian asked him to co-sign a business loan. I frowned. Brian never told us that. He wouldn't have wanted to, Thomas continued. The loan was for a real estate investment company Brian wanted to start. Did Richard agree? No. Why not? Thomas looked directly at me. Because he conducted a background check first. Helen blinked. Richard did a background check. Thomas smiled faintly. You knew Richard. She laughed softly. I suppose I should have guessed. Richard trusted people, but he verified everything. Thomas continued reading. The investigation revealed that Brian had accumulated substantial personal debt through speculative investments. How much? I asked. At the time. He looked at the report. Just under $300,000. Helen gasped. My stomach tightened. 300,000? Thomas nodded. He had refinanced properties multiple times, borrowed against future commissions, and guaranteed several failing partnerships. I thought back over the years. Brian always drove a new vehicle. They vacationed in expensive resorts. Jennifer wore designer handbags. I had assumed they were doing well. Perhaps they had only been spending borrowed money. Thomas continued. Richard refused to co-sign. I wish he had told me. He didn't want you to worry. That sounded painfully familiar. Everything Richard had hidden had been an attempt to protect me. Thomas turned another page. Brian became angry. How angry? He accused Richard of not trusting him. I almost laughed. He was right. Thomas smiled briefly. Richard answered. He looked at the memorandum. Trust isn't given because someone marries your daughter. It's earned. I could almost hear Richard saying those words. Calm, firm, impossible to bully. Thomas continued. That meeting ended badly. What happened afterward? Brian never again asked Richard directly for financial help. But Richard noticed something. What? He noticed Brian started asking Jennifer questions instead. Questions. Always questions about the house, the deed, the mortgage, the trust. Without realizing it, Brian had simply changed strategies. I rubbed my forehead. So this wasn't sudden? No. It started years ago. Thomas nodded. I believe so. Reverend Holloway finally spoke. Does this prove Brian committed fraud? Thomas shook his head. No. Then why is it important? Because it establishes motive. He tapped the file. This wasn't a desperate decision made last week. It was planned. Exactly. He looked toward me. And that's something the court should know. I nodded slowly. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood something I had refused to see. Jennifer hadn't suddenly become greedy after Richard died. Someone had been whispering in her ear for years. That didn't excuse her. But it explained how slowly the change had happened. Thomas wasn't finished. There is one more document. He removed a folded sheet from the file. I almost forgot this existed. Across the top were the words, Statement of Intent. What is that? I asked. Richard insisted on preparing it after the trust was completed. Thomas handed it to me. It wasn't long, only 1 page. It began, If anyone ever challenges Melissa Moore's right to remain in our home, I want the court to understand why I made these decisions. Tears immediately filled my eyes. I continued reading silently. My wife is generous to a fault. She believes the best in people, especially our daughter. That is one of the reasons I fell in love with her. It is also why I fear someone could someday persuade her to surrender what she spent a lifetime building. My vision blurred. Richard had described me perfectly. Thomas quietly waited while I finished. The final paragraph read, "This trust is not punishment. It is protection. If Jennifer proves me wrong, I will be grateful even after I'm gone. If she proves me right, then I ask whoever is reading this to remember that protecting Melissa was never about money. It was about preserving her dignity." I folded the paper carefully. No one spoke. Finally, Helen whispered, "He loved you so much." I smiled through tears. "I know." Thomas gently took the document back. "The judge will appreciate reading this." I hope she never has to. So do I. At that moment, Thomas's assistant entered again. "Mr. Bennett?" "Yes." "You asked me to monitor the county docket." "I did." She handed him another printout. Thomas scanned it quickly. His eyebrows rose. "What is it?" I asked. He looked almost surprised. "Jennifer's attorney just filed an amendment." "An amendment to the guardianship petition." My heart started racing again. "What changed?" Thomas read silently for another moment. Then he looked up. "They've expanded the request." "How?" "They're no longer asking only for temporary financial authority." A terrible feeling settled in my stomach. "What else?" Thomas answered quietly. "They're asking the court to authorize your immediate removal from the residence." He paused. "And permission to relocate you permanently into assisted living." Helen stood so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "They want to put her in a nursing home." Thomas nodded once. "That's exactly what they're asking." I felt all the air leave my lungs. A nursing home. Not because I needed one, because an empty house would be easier to sell. Reverend Holloway shook his head in disbelief. "How can they ask for that?" Thomas's expression hardened. "They can ask." He closed the file. "But tomorrow?" He looked directly into my eyes. "They're going to have to explain to Judge Eleanor Hayes why they believed they could move a perfectly healthy woman out of her own home while secretly trying to sell it." For the first time since I walked into that motel room, I wasn't afraid of the courtroom. I wanted to be there. Because somewhere inside the Franklin County Courthouse, Jennifer still believed the old deed would save her. She had no idea that the original trust, Richard's statement of intent, Brian's emails, my medical records, and every witness Thomas had assembled were waiting to tell a completely different story. Tomorrow, the courtroom wouldn't just decide who owned a house. It would finally hear the truth. I arrived at the Franklin County Courthouse before 8 o'clock Friday morning. The courthouse had always intimidated me. Its tall marble columns, polished floors, and echoing hallways made every voice sound smaller than it really was. Richard used to tell me that courtrooms weren't built to frighten honest people. They're built, he would say, to slow everyone down until the truth has a chance to catch up. As Helen parked the car, I took a deep breath. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No," she smiled. "Good." I looked at her. The people who walk into court overconfident are usually the ones who haven't prepared. Thomas was already waiting near the security entrance. He carried 3 thick binders under one arm and a leather briefcase in the other. When he saw me, he smiled. "You look stronger today." "I feel stronger." Richard would have noticed. Those words stayed with me as we passed through security. The hearing was scheduled in courtroom 4B. Outside the courtroom, several attorneys stood quietly reviewing files. Then I saw Jennifer. She looked exhausted. Her expensive navy blue suit was perfectly pressed, but the circles beneath her eyes couldn't be hidden by makeup. She wasn't alone. Brian stood beside her wearing a dark gray suit, speaking rapidly into his phone. He noticed me first, for only a second. Then he forced a polite smile. "Melissa?" I didn't answer. Jennifer slowly turned around. For a moment, we simply looked at one another. I searched her face for the little girl I once knew. She searched mine for... I wasn't sure. Maybe weakness, maybe guilt, maybe surrender. Instead, I simply nodded. "Good morning, Jennifer." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Mom." Before either of us could say another word, Brian stepped between us. "Our attorney will handle communication." Thomas walked forward immediately. "I agree." Brian's smile disappeared. Their attorney arrived a moment later. He introduced himself politely. "David Collins." Thomas shook his hand. "Thomas Bennett." The two men studied each other with the quiet respect experienced lawyers often have. Then the courtroom doors opened. "Bennett versus Carter," the bailiff announced. "Counsel parties, please enter." The courtroom wasn't large. Judge Eleanor Hayes sat at the bench reviewing documents before looking up. She appeared exactly as Thomas had described. Calm, observant, impossible to rush. Everyone stood as she entered. "Please be seated." The hearing began. David Collins stood first. "Your Honor, this matter concerns an elderly widow experiencing significant cognitive decline." Judge Hayes looked toward me. I met her eyes without looking away. Collins continued. "Ms. Jennifer Carter has petitioned for temporary guardianship solely to protect her mother's welfare." Protect. That word again. Everything Jennifer had done had been wrapped in that word. Collins spoke for nearly 10 minutes. He described my grief after Richard's death. He described my living alone. He described my supposed confusion. He described my visit to the motel. He described my emotional confrontation outside the house. Every true fact was rearranged until it pointed toward one false conclusion. Finally, he sat down. Judge Hayes turned to Thomas. "Mr. Bennett." Thomas stood calmly. "Your Honor." He waited just long enough for every eye in the courtroom to settle on him. "This case is not about protecting Melissa Moore." He paused. "It is about obtaining control of Melissa Moore's property." Brian shifted slightly in his chair. Thomas continued. "The petitioner asks this court to believe Mrs. Moore cannot make decisions." He picked up one folder. "So let us begin with the people who know her best." Judge Hayes nodded. "Proceed." Thomas called the first witness. Dr. Susan Reynolds. She testified clearly. Melissa Moore had completed a full physical examination. She had scored perfectly on every cognitive assessment. She independently managed medication. Finances, appointments, transportation, no evidence of dementia, no evidence of cognitive impairment, no recommendation for guardianship. David Collins attempted cross-examination. "Dr. Cognitive decline can develop rapidly, can it not?" "It can." "So your examination 4 months ago doesn't absolutely guarantee competency today?" "No examination can predict the future." Collins smiled. "So it is possible." Dr. Reynolds smiled back. "It is also possible that every attorney in this courtroom will forget their own names before lunch." Several people laughed quietly. Judge Hayes hid a smile. Dr. Reynolds continued. "I testify based on evidence, not speculation." Collins sat down. Thomas called Helen next. Helen described everything. The contractor who never arrived, the motel, the boxes leaving Richard's study, the changed locks, the realtor, the for sale sign. Her testimony never changed. Not once. Collins tried another approach. "Mrs. Brooks, you are a close friend of Mrs. Moore." "I am." "So naturally you would support her." "I support the truth." He changed direction. "You dislike Jennifer." Helen answered immediately. "I loved Jennifer from the day she was born." That surprised everyone, including Jennifer. Helen continued. "I baked birthday cakes for her. I babysat her. I watched her graduate." She looked directly toward Jennifer, "which is exactly why this breaks my heart." The courtroom became silent. Judge Hayes made several notes. Thomas stood again. "Your Honor." "Yes, Mr. Bennett." "I would like to call Denise Palmer." The managing broker walked to the witness stand. She looked nervous. Thomas spoke gently. "Mrs. Palmer, who contacted your office first regarding the sale, Brian Carter. Who represented himself as managing the property, Brian Carter. What were you told about Melissa Moore?" Denise swallowed. "That she was mentally declining." "Were you informed legal authority had already been obtained?" "We were told guardianship paperwork was being finalized." Thomas held up the filing date. "When was guardianship actually filed?" Denise looked at the document. "The day after the property listing." Thomas nodded. "So, when your office was contacted?" "There was no guardianship." "No." "No power of attorney?" "No." "No legal authority to sell?" "No." Thomas walked slowly toward the evidence table. "Did your office remove the listing voluntarily?" "Immediately." "Why?" "Because we learned the representations made to us were inaccurate." David Collins objected. "Calls for a legal conclusion." "Sustained." Thomas nodded. He changed the question. "Did your office continue marketing the property?" "No." "Why not?" "Because ownership was disputed." "No further questions." Judge Hayes looked thoughtful. Thomas returned to counsel table. Then he stood again. "Your Honor?" "Yes." "I now request permission to introduce petitioner's email correspondence with Palmer and Reed Realty." Collins immediately stood. "Objection." "On what grounds?" "Relevance." Thomas smiled very slightly. "These emails establish planning weeks before any alleged cognitive emergency." Judge Hayes considered for only a moment. "Overruled." Thomas approached the clerk. The emails appeared on courtroom monitors, one after another. Brian. We'd like to begin preparing the property before legal authority is finalized. Brian, we expect no resistance once guardianship is approved. Jennifer, are we sure this is the only way? Brian, stop second-guessing everything. Once the guardianship is approved, she'll have no choice. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. Judge Hayes read each message carefully. She looked over her glasses toward Jennifer. Mrs. Carter. Jennifer slowly stood. Yes, Your Honor. You sent this email? Jennifer looked at Brian, then at her attorney. Finally, yes. And this one, yes. Judge Hayes held up another page. You anticipated obtaining guardianship before the hearing. Jennifer's voice trembled. I believed... She stopped. What did you believe? Jennifer looked at Brian again. This time, Judge Hayes noticed. Mrs. Carter. Jennifer slowly turned back toward the bench. Answer my question. I believed it was the safest plan. Judge Hayes asked quietly. For whom? Jennifer couldn't answer. The silence lasted nearly 10 seconds. Then Thomas stood. Your Honor. He reached into his briefcase. I believe we're now ready to discuss why Richard Moore changed the property's ownership structure 4 years before his death. Brian's head snapped toward Thomas. For the first time, his confidence disappeared. Thomas placed a sealed folder on the evidence table. Across the front were the words, Original Recorded Trust Documents. Brian whispered something urgently to David Collins. Collins's face changed immediately. Judge Hayes noticed. Counsel. David Collins slowly stood. Yes, Your Honor. Do you need a recess? He hesitated, then looked toward Jennifer. Jennifer's face had gone completely pale. She wasn't looking at the judge. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the folder. Because she finally understood. Whatever copy of the deed she possessed, it wasn't the document that actually controlled the house. Richard had made sure of that years before. And in just a few moments, the courtroom was about to see exactly how. The courtroom became so quiet that I could hear the rustle of paper as Thomas Bennett lifted the sealed folder from the evidence table. Jennifer sat perfectly still. Brian did not. He leaned toward his attorney again, whispering urgently, his jaw tight enough that I could see the muscles moving from where I sat. Judge Eleanor Hayes noticed immediately. Mr. Collins, she said calmly, is there a problem? David Collins stood. No, Your Honor. Very well. Judge Hayes looked toward Thomas. You may proceed. Thomas nodded respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor. He carefully opened the folder. I am holding the original recorded documents establishing the Moore Family Residence Trust. He placed the first document before the court clerk. This document was executed by Richard Moore and Melissa Moore 4 years ago. The clerk handed it to Judge Hayes. She adjusted her glasses and began reading. No one spoke. The only sound in this courtroom was the turning of pages. After nearly a minute, Judge Hayes looked up. Mr. Bennett? Yes, Your Honor. This trust appears to have been properly executed. It was. Recorded with the Franklin County Recorder's Office. Yes. Never revoked. No. Judge Hayes nodded once. She turned another page. The trust grants Melissa Moore the exclusive lifetime right to occupy and control the residence. Correct. No sale may occur without her voluntary written consent. Correct. She continued reading. The trustee has an affirmative duty to oppose any attempt to remove Melissa Moore from the property through coercion or fraudulent means. Thomas smiled slightly. Richard was very thorough. Judge Hayes looked directly at me. It would appear he was. Then she turned toward Jennifer. Mrs. Carter. Jennifer slowly stood. Did you know this trust existed? Jennifer swallowed. No. Judge Hayes watched her carefully. You never asked your father about later estate planning? No. You relied only on an older deed. Yes. Judge Hayes nodded thoughtfully. So the legal basis for selling this property never existed. Jennifer's voice became almost inaudible. I didn't know. Thomas remained silent. He knew the documents were speaking for themselves. Judge Hayes placed the trust aside. What else do you have, Mr. Bennett? Thomas reached into the folder again. Your Honor, I would like to introduce Richard Moore's statement of intent. David Collins stood immediately. Objection. Judge Hayes looked up. Basis. This document reflects the thoughts of a deceased individual. Thomas responded before the judge could speak. It explains the purpose behind the trust and rebuts the petitioner's suggestion that these arrangements were accidental or outdated. Judge Hayes considered briefly. Overruled. She accepted the document. The courtroom waited while she read. I watched her expression change, not dramatically. Judge Hayes was too experienced for that, but I noticed the small tightening around her eyes. When she finished, she looked toward me. Mrs. Moore. Yes, Your Honor. Did you know your husband prepared this statement? No. Her eyes softened slightly. I didn't think so. She placed the statement beside the trust. Then she looked directly at Jennifer. Mrs. Carter. Jennifer stood once more. Yes. Your father specifically anticipated that someone might pressure your mother into surrendering this home. Jennifer looked down. He believed his wife needed protection. Silence. Judge Hayes continued. Can you explain why your mother was placed in a motel immediately before the property was listed? Jennifer hesitated. There were plumbing concerns. Thomas quietly stood. Permission to address that point. Granted. He handed another document to the clerk. An inspection report from a licensed plumbing company. Judge Hayes read the first page. The inspection occurred yesterday. Correct. What were the findings? Thomas answered calmly. No plumbing failure. Judge Hayes continued reading. No mold. No structural water damage. No emergency repairs recommended. Thomas nodded. Correct. Judge Hayes slowly placed the report on top of the others. So there was no condition requiring Melissa Moore to leave her home. No. She looked toward Jennifer again. Mrs. Carter. Jennifer opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, No. Judge Hayes made another note. The silence inside the courtroom felt heavier than before. Thomas spoke again. Your Honor, I have one final witness. Judge Hayes nodded. Proceed? I call Melissa Moore. My heart began pounding. Helen squeezed my hand gently before I stood. You'll do fine. I walked to the witness stand, raised my right hand, took the oath, sat down. Thomas smiled reassuringly. Mrs. Moore? Yes. How long did you live in your home? 41 years. Who built that life with you? My husband, Richard. Did you ever agree to sell your house? No. Did you ever authorize Jennifer Carter or Brian Carter to sell it? No. Did you ever give either of them permission to change your locks? No. Did you ever tell them you wanted to move into assisted living? No. Thomas nodded. Why did you go to the motel? Because my daughter told me my home wasn't safe. Were you told it would only be temporary? Yes. What did you discover when you returned? I took a slow breath. My key no longer worked. The courtroom remained silent. I saw strangers inside my home. I swallowed. My husband's photograph had been taken off the wall. I paused. My porch swing was gone. Tears filled my eyes. But, I smiled sadly, the worst part wasn't losing access to my house. Thomas waited. What was the worst part? I looked toward Jennifer. The worst part, my voice trembled, was realizing my daughter believed I would never find out. Jennifer's shoulders began shaking. She lowered her head. Thomas remained quiet for several moments before asking his final question. Mrs. Moore. Yes. If this court rules in your favor. He paused. What do you want? I looked around the courtroom, at Judge Hayes, at Helen, at Thomas, at Jennifer. Finally, I answered. I want to go home. Nothing more, no revenge, no money, no punishment. Just home. Judge Hayes watched me for a long moment. Then she looked toward David Collins. Counsel, do you wish to cross-examine? David Collins slowly stood. He looked toward Jennifer, then toward Brian, then back to the judge. After several seconds, No, Your Honor. The courtroom became completely still. Even Thomas looked surprised. Judge Hayes folded her hands. Very well. She reviewed her notes for nearly 2 full minutes. No one moved. Finally, she looked up. This court has heard sufficient evidence. My heart pounded. Judge Hayes spoke slowly. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. I closed my eyes, not because I was surprised, because hearing the words out loud felt unreal. Judge Hayes continued. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Melissa Moore is fully competent to manage her own affairs. Another pause. The court further finds that the petitioner sought legal authority while simultaneously pursuing the unauthorized sale of the respondent's residence. Jennifer began crying quietly. Judge Hayes looked directly at her. Mrs. Carter. Jennifer stood. The relationship between concern and control is often misunderstood. She paused. But today's evidence demonstrates something much more troubling. Jennifer couldn't look up. Judge Hayes continued. You removed your mother from her home. You changed the locks. You represented to third parties that you possessed legal authority you did not have. You attempted to obtain guardianship after beginning the process of selling property you did not own. The courtroom remained silent. Judge Hayes looked toward the clerk. I am referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for review of potential civil and criminal issues arising from the evidence presented. Brian's face lost all color. David Collins slowly lowered his head. Judge Hayes wasn't finished. She turned toward me. Mrs. Moore? Yes, Your Honor. I hope you understand something. I waited. The law has confirmed what your husband tried very hard to protect. My throat tightened. This house, she smiled gently, has always been yours. The gavel came down. Hearing concluded. For a few moments no one moved. Then Jennifer suddenly stood. Mom! Her voice broke completely. I turned toward her. She was crying harder than I had ever seen. She couldn't finish. Brian reached for her arm. Let's go. She pulled away. No. He grabbed her again, more firmly this time. Before anyone else reacted, Judge Hayes looked back from the bench. Mr. Carter? Brian froze. I strongly suggest you remove your hand. He immediately let go. Jennifer stepped away from him. For the first time, not toward me, not toward Brian, but completely alone. For several moments after the hearing ended, no one moved. The courtroom, which had been filled with arguments only minutes earlier, now felt strangely quiet. Judge Hayes had already left the bench. The bailiff was gathering paperwork. Attorneys were closing briefcases. Yet I remained seated. Not because my legs were weak, because I had waited so many days to hear someone say that my home was still mine that I almost didn't know how to stand afterward. Helen was the first to reach me. She wrapped both arms around my shoulders. You did it. I smiled through tears. We did it. Thomas joined us a moment later. No, he said gently. Richard did. The three of us laughed softly. For the first time since this nightmare began, it didn't feel like a painful laugh. It felt like relief. Then I heard someone quietly say my name. Mom! I turned. Jennifer was standing only a few feet away. Brian was nowhere to be seen. Her mascara had streaked down both cheeks. She looked exhausted, smaller somehow, not physically, emotionally. The confidence she had carried into the courtroom had disappeared. She looked like someone who had finally run out of excuses. I know you probably don't want to see me. I didn't answer. I deserve that. She looked down at the floor. I lied. The words echoed through the nearly empty courtroom. I lied to everyone. Another pause. I lied to Aunt Carol. I lied to Mark. I lied to Denise. I lied to the realtor. She swallowed hard. And she could barely force out the last sentence. I lied to myself. I listened quietly. She wiped her face. I kept telling myself I was helping you. She laughed bitterly. But every time I repeated it, she looked at me. It became easier not to think about what I was really doing. My heart ached, not because the pain disappeared, because I finally recognized the daughter I had raised, not the woman who had manipulated me, the one who knew she had done wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. She looked at the floor again. I don't even expect you to speak to me. Thomas quietly stepped back, giving us privacy. Helen did the same. Jennifer took a shaky breath. I just needed you to know something. I waited. The motel? She began crying again. Was my idea. I closed my eyes. That hurt more than I expected. But, she quickly continued, selling the house? She shook her head. I never wanted it to happen like this. What do you mean? Her voice became almost a whisper. Brian said we were already too far in. I remained silent. He said if I stopped, she wiped away tears, we'd lose everything. What everything? Our house, our savings, our marriage. She looked completely defeated. I believed him. I studied her face carefully. There was no arrogance left. No anger. Only shame. Jennifer. She slowly looked up. You still made your own choices. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I know. You signed papers. I know. You let people believe I was losing my mind. She covered her face. I know. You watched them lock me out. I know. Each admission seemed to break something inside her. Finally, she whispered, I'm so sorry. The words were real. I could hear it. The apology wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't strategic. It came from the place where regret lives after pride dies. I walked toward her. She looked frightened. Perhaps she thought I might slap her. Instead, I reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face, just as I had done when she was a little girl. She immediately began sobbing. I'm sorry, Mom. I know. I don't deserve another chance. I thought about that carefully. Then I answered honestly. No. She looked crushed. I continued. You don't deserve another chance simply because you're sorry. She nodded slowly. You earn trust. I paused. One decision at a time. She cried even harder. I understand. I hope you do. Another long silence settled between us. Finally, she asked, "Will you ever forgive me?" That was the question everyone expected. The dramatic ending. The perfect reconciliation. But real life rarely works that way. I looked into my daughter's eyes. I don't know. She nodded. I appreciate your honesty. I still love you. She looked surprised. I always will. I smiled sadly. But loving someone and trusting someone are not the same thing. She lowered her head. I know. I'll pray that one day they become the same again. She whispered, So will I. She quietly turned and walked away. Not because the story was over, because healing doesn't happen in one conversation. Sometimes it begins with leaving. After Jennifer disappeared down the courthouse hallway, Thomas walked back over. How are you feeling? I thought about it. Tired. He laughed. I expected that. And grateful. He nodded. Richard would have liked that answer. Later that afternoon, Helen drove me home. My home. Those words felt new again. A sheriff's deputy met us there with paperwork authorizing immediate access. The locksmith arrived shortly afterward. He removed Brian's lock. Then he looked at me. Would you like to keep this key? I smiled. No. He installed a brand new lock, then handed me 2 shining brass keys. I held one tightly in my hand. The front door opened slowly. I stepped inside. The house smelled unfamiliar. Furniture had been moved. Pictures were missing. Several closets stood open. Boxes remained stacked in the hallway. But beneath all of that, it still smelled faintly of cedar. Richard! I walked from room to room without speaking. The kitchen, the dining room, the living room, the staircase. Richard's study. When I entered his study, I stopped. His chair was still there. His desk, his reading lamp. The photograph Jennifer had taken off the wall had been left leaning against the bookshelf exactly where I had seen it before. I picked it up carefully. It showed Richard with one arm around my shoulders. We were laughing at something outside the camera's view. I brought us home, I whispered. I placed the picture back where it belonged. Helen quietly watched from the doorway. Need any help? I smiled. Yes. What first? I looked toward the front porch. The swing. She laughed. I thought you'd say that. The next several weeks passed slowly. The realtor removed every online listing. The county corrected every public record. The investigation into Brian's actions continued. Jennifer moved into a small apartment after filing for divorce several months later. She wrote letters, not asking for money, not asking for forgiveness, only updating me about counseling work and the life she was trying to rebuild. I answered some. Not all. Healing. I learned is not measured by how quickly we forget. It's measured by how honestly we rebuild. One Saturday morning in early autumn, Helen and I replanted the rose bushes Brian had ordered removed. As we worked, sunlight filtered through the maple tree Richard had planted decades earlier. The porch swing had been restored. Fresh paint covered the front railing. The windows were open for the first time in a long while. The house sounded alive again. I sat on the swing with a cup of tea as evening settled over the neighborhood. The new brass key rested in my pocket. Richard's letter rested inside the drawer beside our bed. Neither one represented ownership. They represented something far more valuable, the right to live with dignity. People sometimes think the greatest victory is winning in court. They're wrong. The greatest victory is waking up in your own home, looking around without fear, and knowing no one can convince you that your life belongs to someone else. Richard understood that. Thomas defended it. Helen protected it. And at 68 years old, I finally learned to protect it myself. Life has a way of testing us through the people we love the most. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from those we trusted without question. Yet this story is not only about betrayal. It's about the quiet strength that can survive it. Melissa never fought for a house simply because it was valuable. She fought for the memories built inside it, for the promises she made with her husband, and for the dignity every person deserves regardless of age. Growing older should never mean surrendering your voice or allowing others to decide your future without your consent. Kindness is a beautiful quality, but kindness without boundaries can invite those who mistake generosity for weakness. Richard's greatest gift was not the trust he created. It was his faith in Melissa. He knew that one day she might doubt herself because someone she loved would try to make her question her own judgment. His letter reminded her of something every one of us needs to remember. Your worth does not disappear with age, grief, or loneliness. No one has the right to erase your independence simply because it benefits them. Jennifer's story is also a reminder that bad choices rarely happen all at once. They begin with small compromises, excuses, and moments when we ignore our conscience. Every decision either strengthens our character or weakens it. The good news is that repentance is possible, but rebuilding trust always takes far longer than breaking it. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you, or someone you know, ever experienced betrayal within your own family? Do you believe Melissa made the right decision by refusing to forgive too quickly, or would you have handled it differently? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are, and if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Thank you for spending your time with me today, and until next time, may you never forget that your dignity, your voice, and your home are always worth protecting.